James Harrison had built his fortune from the ground up, turning a small family business into one of the most profitable companies in Los Angeles. To the outside world, he was the picture of success, polished, confident, and surrounded by all the trappings of wealth. Yet behind the closed doors of his sprawling mansion, James carried with him an invisible burden. He had been betrayed before by business partners, old friends, and even family. This left him deeply suspicious of everyone around him, convinced that loyalty was only as strong as the number of zeros in his bank account. Rosa had worked in his mansion for nearly 7 years. At 36, she was known not only for her reliability, but also for her quiet dignity. She was a single mother raising her daughter Maria, who was now attending college out of state. Rosa often sacrificed her own needs to ensure her daughter's education and future. James knew this, but his hardened heart still whispered doubts. What if she's just here for the money? What if the chance comes and she takes advantage? His mind, clouded by distrust, refused to rest. One evening, after a tense day filled with business calls and suspicions gnawing at his mind, James decided to put Rosa to the ultimate test. He went into his study, a grand room with dark oak shelves, and a massive steel safe built into the wall. Inside were stacks of cash, expensive watches, and priceless documents. With deliberate care, James spun the dial and left the door slightly ajar, enough for anyone entering to notice. The thick bundles of $100 bills spilled out just enough to catch the eye. He left the lamp glowing softly, creating a scene. That was almost too tempting. As midnight approached, Rosa entered the study with her usual routine. She carried her dusting cloth and polished the desk where James often worked. Her eyes caught the glimmer of green from the open safe. She paused, for a moment her chest tightening. Rosa wasn't blind to the realities of her life. Her bills piled up at home, her daughter's tuition weighed heavily on her shoulders, and she worked long hours just to make ends meet. One handful of that money could ease her burdens instantly. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself, feeling the weight of temptation press hard against her. Unbeknownst to Rosa, James stood hidden just beyond the hallway, watching her every move with sharp, calculating eyes. He expected hesitation, maybe a glance around the room, or even the shaking of hands reaching toward the safe. Instead, Rosa stepped closer, gently pushing the heavy steel door closed until it latched with a soft click. She sighed, as if speaking, only to herself, and whispered, "Your trust is worth more than this." She then returned to her work, dusting the corners of the room and straightening a stack of books, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. James felt his throat tighten as he leaned back into the shadows. His chest ached with a strange, unfamiliar feeling. He had left that money there to trap her, to prove his suspicion right. Instead, Rosa had shown him something he hadn't seen in years: integrity without an audience, loyalty without reward. He stayed silent as she finished her chores and left the room, the soft sound of her footsteps fading into the quiet of the mansion. For the first time in years, James questioned whether his wealth had blinded him to the real value of the people around him. The next morning, James woke early, restless from the events of the night before. He sat at his breakfast table, sipping coffee, but the bitterness in the cup was nothing compared to the bitterness he felt toward himself. He had set a cruel test for someone who had never once wronged him. The image of Rosa closing the safe replayed in his mind over and over. The gentle way she pressed it shut, the quiet words she spoke. Her dignity cut through the walls he had built around his heart, and for the first time in years, he felt ashamed. When Rosa entered to serve breakfast, she greeted him with her usual warmth, unaware of what he had done. She placed the tray carefully and asked politely if he needed anything else. James studied her face, calm, steady, and filled with the quiet strength of someone who had lived through hardship. She looked nothing like the greedy caricature his mind had painted. Instead, she looked like someone who carried the weight of responsibility with grace. He wanted to speak, to confess what he had done, but his pride chained his tongue. Instead, he simply thanked her softly. Later that day, James walked into his study again. The safe stood closed, its contents untouched, as if mocking his suspicions. He sat heavily at his desk, staring at the silent steel door. All his life he had measured people by how much they wanted from him. Yet Rosa, who had every reason to take, had chosen to protect what wasn't hers. That simple act shook him more than the biggest business deal ever had. He thought about Maria, her daughter, how Rosa often saved her earnings just to pay tuition. The realization pierced him. Rosa lived with honor, while he lived with distrust. By evening, James made a decision. He called Rosa into the study. She arrived quickly, her expression neutral but slightly worried. Sensing the weight of his tone, he gestured toward the chair across from him. "Rosa," he began, his voice uneven. "Last night I left the safe open on purpose." Her eyes widened, confusion flashing across her face. He continued, "I wanted to test you. I thought maybe you would take something. But you didn't. You did the opposite. You closed it and respected it more than I did myself." His words trembled as the silence grew heavy. Rosa sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. A flicker of hurt crossed her features, though she tried to hide it. "Mr. Harrison," she finally said, her voice steady, "I may not have riches, but I have my dignity. If I lose that, what do I have left to give my daughter?" Her words cut through him like a blade, simple, honest, undeniable. James bowed his head, his chest heavy with guilt. "I was wrong to doubt you," he whispered. "You've given me more than loyalty. You've reminded me what trust really means." His eyes glistened as he finally looked at her. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted between them. No longer was Rosa just the maid, and James just the master. They were two human beings, stripped of wealth and position, connected by something far more valuable: respect. James reached into his desk and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check, not for her weekly wages, but for Maria's entire next year of tuition. Rosa gasped, her hands trembling as she refused at first, but James insisted. "You've given me back faith in people," he said quietly. "Let me give something back in return." For the first time in years, Rosa's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. That night, as James stood alone in his mansion, he felt lighter than he had in decades. The safe, once a symbol of his mistrust, now represented something different, a turning point. He realized that no matter how much wealth he accumulated, it could never replace the purity of honesty and loyalty. Rosa had passed the test he never should have given, and in doing so, she had changed him. For the first time, James understood that true richness wasn't found in vaults or safes. It was found in the hearts of people who chose integrity over temptation.